I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president set up a fake estate auction on my front lawn while I drove home from my father's funeral. And her excuse? She said I had unpaid dues, with a court order she printed herself. Funny thing is, the only thing that sold that day was her lies. But let me start from the beginning. The dust of West Texas still clung to my black suit, a fine red powder that felt like a final, gritty handshake from my father. I'd spent 3 days watching him go, first in a hospital bed that smelled of antiseptic and regret, then in a polished casket lowered into the same hard earth he'd been born from. The drive back to Colorado was a blur of empty highways and emptier thoughts. Grief is a quiet thing. It settles in your bones, a heavy, cold weight that makes the world feel distant and muffled. All I wanted was the familiar silence of my own land, the sight of the Rockies scratching the sky, the creak of the porch swing where Dad and I used to sit. My ranch wasn't just property. It was 400 acres of Caldwell history, a legacy of sweat and calloused hands passed down through 4 generations. It was home. But the world, it turns out, doesn't pause for a man's grief. I saw it from a mile down the county road, a splash of unnatural color against the muted greens and browns of my valley. A white tent, stark and clinical, was pitched on my front lawn. My lawn, the one I just paid to have resodded last fall. Brightly colored pennant flags, the kind you see at a used car dealership, flapped in the breeze, strung from the porch railing to a temporary post hammered into the ground. A professionally printed sign was staked near my cattle guard, the letters big and bold. Estate auction. Public welcome. That's my yard. That sign says otherwise. Wrong. Estate auction? I'm alive. This is a dressed-up foreclosure to bait a crowd. My heart, which had been beating a slow, mournful rhythm for days, kicked into a hard, sharp staccato. This wasn't possible. It was a mistake, some kind of grotesque cosmic joke. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator of my old Ford F-250, the engine groaning in protest as I turned onto my private drive. There were cars parked along the gravel path, nice cars, luxury sedans, and shiny SUVs that had no business on a working ranch. People milled about, clutching numbered paddles and complimentary water bottles. They walked through my mother's rose garden, peering into the windows of the main house, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and greedy appraisal. They were vultures circling something they thought was dead. And in the center of it all, orchestrating the desecration, stood a woman. I knew her instantly. Eleanor Vance, president of the Elk Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, a title she wore like a crown. The HOA's jurisdiction supposedly ended a full 2 miles from my property line, a fact my father had confirmed with county surveyors years ago. We were ranchers, not suburbanites. We didn't have rules about lawn ornaments or the color you could paint your mailbox. Eleanor was immaculate as always. Her blonde hair was shellacked into a perfect helmet. Her white pantsuit was spotless, and she held a clipboard like a scepter. She was pointing, directing 2 men in matching polo shirts as they set up rows of folding chairs. She looked cool, efficient, and completely in charge. When she saw my truck rumbling towards her, a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Her eyes were cold, like chips of blue ice. I pulled the truck to a stop 10 feet from her. The engine idled like a low growl. The dust from my tires settled on the pristine white chairs. I didn't care. I swung the door open and stepped out, the Texas dirt puffing from my suit with every move. I was still in my funeral clothes. The black tie felt like a noose. "Ethan Caldwell," she said, her voice crisp and condescending. "I'm so sorry for your loss. We tried to reach you. It was a lie, and we both knew it." Her expression held no sympathy, only a triumphant arrogance. She was enjoying the violation, the power. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, then at the circus she'd erected on my land. I saw the auctioneer's podium, the loudspeakers, the portable toilets near my barn. My barn, where my father's tools still hung on the walls, each one in its proper place. My gaze swept over the crowd, then back to her. My silence seemed to unnerve her more than any shouting match would have. I was a recon scout in the Army. I learned patience. I learned to observe, to assess a threat before acting. And Eleanor Vance, with her clipboard and her smug smile, was a threat. "This is a legally sanctioned community sale," she continued, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on her clipboard. "The association has been forced to act on several long-standing compliance violations and unpaid liens. It's all in the bylaws, Ethan. A real shame it had to come to this. Violations. Liens. My father paid his bills the day they arrived. He was meticulous, a man of ledgers and receipts. He respected the law, even when he didn't like it. He wouldn't have let anything slide, especially not with the HOA he despised. The story was a fabrication, a flimsy excuse for a land grab. I could feel the anger coiling in my gut, a hot, dangerous thing. But my face remained a mask. My training taught me to control it, to channel it. Anger makes you sloppy. I needed to be sharp. I took a slow breath, the clean mountain air doing little to calm the storm inside me. Eleanor, I said, my voice low and even, betraying none of the rage I felt. Get your people, your signs, and your tent, and get off my property. She laughed, a short, sharp bark that grated on my nerves. Oh, Ethan, you don't seem to understand. This isn't your property anymore. Not according to these, she said, waving a sheath of papers from her clipboard. You have 5 minutes to remove your personal vehicle, or it will be towed at your expense. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking to stand on a man's land his family had bled for, and tell him he was trespassing. She turned her back on me then, a clear dismissal, and spoke to one of her polo shirt minions. Dennis, call the tow service and see if the sheriff is on his way. Mr. Caldwell is creating a disturbance. She was trying to provoke me, to make me lash out so she could play the victim. It was a classic bully tactic, but I wasn't some hothead she could easily manipulate. I was my father's son, and this was my father's ranch. The fight had just begun, and she had no idea who she was dealing with. My next move wouldn't be loud or angry. It would be precise. I turned without another word, got back in my truck, and started driving not away, but toward the main road. I had to see just how far this charade went. Funny thing, they hadn't blocked the drive when I came in. They rolled it out while I was facing Eleanor. A trap after the welcome. The barricade wasn't much, but it was insulting. 2 sawhorses painted a garish safety orange, with a length of yellow rope strung between them. A flimsy plastic sign, zip-tied to the rope, read, HOA event, private access only. It blocked the entrance to my own driveway. My driveway, the one I'd helped my dad pave one sweltering summer when I was 16. 2 men stood beside it, chests puffed out, holding clipboards like they were shields. They wore the same navy blue polo shirts as the ones on my lawn, with a little embroidered ERHOA, Elk Ridge HOA, logo on the breast. They looked like they'd been chosen for their size, not their intellect. One was thick-necked and balding. The other was younger, with a wispy mustache that looked like a mistake. Clipboard goons. That's all they were. I put the truck in park and killed the engine. The sudden silence was heavy. I sat there for a long moment, just watching them. They shifted their weight, trying to look imposing. They were trying to project an authority they didn't have. In the army, you learn to read people fast. You look at their posture, their eyes, the way they hold themselves. These 2 were playing a part. They were nervous. Their confidence was as flimsy as the plastic sign they were guarding. I finally opened my door and stepped out, moving slowly, deliberately. I didn't slam the door. I closed it with a soft click. Every movement was controlled. I walked towards them, my funeral shoes crunching on the gravel. The sun was high now, and the heat was making the black suit feel like an oven. But I didn't let the discomfort show. Morning, I said, my voice calm. I stopped about 10 feet from the rope. You're on private property. The older one, the balding one, stepped forward. He puffed his chest out a little further. Sir, this is a private event sanctioned by the Elk Ridge Homeowners Association. We have a list of approved attendees. Are you on the list? He tried to make his voice sound deep and official. It came out as a strained baritone. My name is Ethan Caldwell, I said, still quiet. This is the Caldwell Ranch. Now, I'm going to ask you one time to move your sawhorses and get out of my driveway. The younger one snickered. He thinks he's a big shot. The older one held up a hand to silence him. He looked down at his clipboard, making a show of flipping through pages. Caldwell. Nope, not on the list. You'll have to leave, sir. We don't want any trouble. There won't be any trouble, I said, my eyes locking onto his. Not if you do the right thing. You're trespassing. This property is not, and has never been, part of any HOA. He shook his head, a smug little smirk on his face. That's not what our paperwork says. We have a court-filed lien and an order for public auction. It's all legal and above board. Now, I'm not going to ask you again. I could see my neighbor, Benny Costello, pulling up in his beat-up Subaru. He lived on the next parcel over, a good man who kept to himself mostly. He got out of his car, a worried look on his face. He was a small, round man who always seemed to be sweating, and today was no exception. "Ethan, what in tarnation is going on?" I saw the signs. He trailed off as he saw the two goons. "They can't do this, can they?" he whispered, looking at me. "No, Benny, they can't," I said, not taking my eyes off the men. Benny shifted from foot to foot like he needed to pee. "I mean, I didn't even RSVP to the HOA meeting, and now I'm at a dang auction. Should I be bidding?" He pulled a Werther's from his shirt pocket and offered it like a peace treaty. "You want a caramel, Ethan?" I panicked. Chew. It broke the tension for a split second. I almost smiled. Almost. The older goon pointed a thick finger at Benny. "Sir, you need to stay in your vehicle. This is an official proceeding." Benny shrank back, intimidated. That was the point. They were here to intimidate, to make ordinary, decent people feel powerless. I took my phone out of my pocket. The older goon tensed up. "What are you doing?" "I'm calling my lawyer," I said simply. "His name is Grant. He's a bit of a bulldog when it comes to property law. Then I'm calling the sheriff, and when he gets here, I'm going to press charges against you personally for trespassing and unlawful restraint." The man's smirk faltered. He hadn't counted on this. He'd expected shouting, maybe some shoving. He didn't expect calm, methodical opposition. "Eleanor," Mrs. Vance said the sheriff was already called. He stammered. "Good," I said. "Then he'll be here soon to arrest you." I didn't actually dial. I just held the phone. It was a bluff, but a calculated one. I was testing their resolve. I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. He was just a hired hand, a bully on a power trip for $50 an hour. He wasn't prepared for actual legal consequences. He looked back towards the house, as if hoping Eleanor would ride to his rescue. She was too far away, busy with her party. He was on his own. "Look, buddy," he said, his tone shifting from authoritative to pleading. "I'm just doing my job. And your job is illegal," I replied flatly. "Move the barricade." An orange flatbed nosed up to the rope. The driver hopped out, gloves on, chain in hand, eyes on my bumper. "Company order. Remove the obstruction," he said. "That obstruction is my truck," I said. I raised my phone, taking photos. Plate, company logo, his face. The shutter clicked 3 times, loud as a gavel. "What's your tow order number?" He blinked. "Look, man, here's mine," I said, flashing Grant's card. "Hook that chain, and you're complicit in criminal trespass." He glanced at the circus by my house, then at the empty road. The chain sagged. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered, backing off. The flatbed idled, then rolled away. The older goon hesitated, his eyes darting between me, the rope, and my truck. The facade of authority was crumbling, revealing the uncertain man beneath. He was a pawn in Eleanor's game, and he was starting to realize he might be the one to get sacrificed. The standoff hung in the air, thick and tense. He knew he was in the wrong, but his pride and his orders were holding him in place. I knew I couldn't just stand here all day. I had to get to my house, and I wasn't going to let these two stop me. It was time to force the issue. Sheriff Brody's cruiser rolled up about 20 minutes later, kicking up a plume of dust that settled over everything like a dirty shroud. I knew Brody. He wasn't a bad man, just a tired one. He'd been sheriff of this county for almost 30 years, and the job had worn him down, smoothed out his edges until he was mostly just procedure and weary sighs. He was a man who preferred paperwork to conflict. He stepped out of his car, adjusting his belt over a belly that had seen too many diner breakfasts. His eyes took in the scene. Me in my funeral suit, the 2 HOA goons looking relieved to see him, the flimsy barricade, and Benny Costello hovering nervously by his car. "Ethan," he said, his voice gravelly. "I was sorry to hear about your dad. He was a good man." "He was," I said. "He also wouldn't have stood for this." I gestured with my chin towards the circus on my lawn. "What's this all about, Brody? Why are there strangers on my property trying to auction it off?" Brody sighed, the sound of a man caught in the middle, which is exactly where he was. Eleanor Vance called it in, said she had a court order, a foreclosure lien for non-payment of HOA dues. Before I could respond, Eleanor herself came marching down the driveway, her heels digging into the gravel. She'd clearly seen the sheriff arrive and wanted to control the narrative. She had her clipboard of lies ready. "Sheriff Brody, thank you for coming," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I'm afraid Mr. Caldwell is being disruptive. He's threatening my staff and attempting to interfere with a lawful public auction." She handed him a folder. "Here is the court-filed paperwork, the lien against the property for over $80,000 in unpaid dues, fines, and legal fees, and the writ of execution authorizing the sale." It's all perfectly legal. Brody took the folder and started leafing through the pages. The documents looked official. They had stamps, signatures, and dense legal text. They were forgeries, but they were good ones. Eleanor was smart. I had to give her that. She knew that the appearance of legality was often enough to win the day, especially with a man like Brody who just wanted to keep the peace. $80,000? I said, my voice tight with controlled fury. For what? We're not in your HOA. We never have been. But you are, Eleanor countered smoothly, a smug little smile playing on her lips. The county zoning was updated 3 years ago, Eleanor said. The Caldwell Ranch was absorbed into the Elk Ridge Estates designated area. We sent multiple notifications. Certified mail. They were all ignored. Zoning isn't membership, I said. You don't vote me into your club by redrawing a map. Another lie. My father would have sooner set fire to his own barn than join her little kingdom of beige houses and manicured lawns. He would have fought it tooth and nail. I want to see the proof of delivery for those letters, I said, looking at Brody. I want to see the original county zoning map, not a photocopy she printed in her office. Brody looked from me to Eleanor, his face a mask of indecision. He was holding a stack of what appeared to be legitimate legal documents in one hand. On the other side was me, the son of a man he respected, making a claim with nothing but my word to back it up. He was caught between the letter of the law or what looked like it in the spirit of the law. Ethan, this paperwork, it looks legitimate, he said, reluctance heavy in his voice. Last month, the state sent us a warning about fake filing seals, case numbers, the whole circus. If I shut down a signed order and I'm wrong, I lose my badge. I have to treat this like it's real until a judge kills it. It's got a judge's signature, a case number. My hands are kind of tied here. Without a countersuit or an injunction from you, I have to assume this order is valid. It's a forgery, Brody, I said, my voice low and intense. You know my father. You know me. Does this sound like something we'd let happen? $80,000 in fees we don't even owe. My feelings on the matter don't change the facts in this folder, he said, tapping the papers. I can't just shut this down based on your word alone. I'm sorry. Eleanor's smile widened. She had won. The system, the bureaucracy, the sheer weight of official-looking paper was on her side. The sheriff, the one man who was supposed to uphold justice, was abdicating his responsibility to a stack of well-crafted lies. He wasn't a bad cop, just a cautious one. And his caution was about to cost me my home. So, you're going to let her do this? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You're going to let her sell my family's home out from under me while I was burying my father? Brody wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked at the ground, at the sky, anywhere but at me. I can't interfere in a civil matter, Ethan. My job is just to keep the peace. As long as Mrs. Vance has this order, the auction can proceed. I'll stick around to make sure things don't get out of hand, but that's all I can do. He was abdicating. He was choosing the path of least resistance. He was allowing this theft to happen in broad daylight with a badge on his chest. The two goons at the barricade smirked, their confidence restored. Eleanor gave me a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had the law, or a convincing imitation of it, on her side for now. I felt a profound sense of isolation. My neighbors were too scared. The law was too blind. And I was on my own. The auction was going to start, and there was nothing I could do to stop it, or so she thought. Brody's indecision wasn't the end. It was just another obstacle, and I was very, very good at dealing with obstacles. The auctioneer was a slick character in a cheap suit and a cowboy hat that looked like it had never seen a real cow. He climbed onto the small, portable stage they had set up, tapped the microphone, and a piercing squeal of feedback echoed across my valley. It felt like a physical assault. The sound was an intrusion, a violation, just like everything else about this day. The small crowd of bidders, about 30 or 40 people, gathered closer, their faces eager. They were sharks smelling blood in the water, hoping to snag a multi-million-dollar property for pennies on the dollar. Calling it an estate sale drags half the county out for bargains. She wanted bodies, cameras, noise. I saw a few of my neighbors in the back, their expressions a mix of sympathy and fear. They wouldn't meet my eyes. They didn't want to get involved. Near the barn, one of Eleanor's men wandered too close to my heifers, a cheap cattle prod dangling like a toy. He jabbed the air to shoo them from the lawn. The high whine clipped my nerves. Drop it, I called. He smirked and stepped toward June, my red heifer. Leo reached him first. He plucked the prod away, clicked it once against a chair, legs parks popped, then set it on the ground. Tools belong to folks who know how to use them, he said. A few bidders actually booed. Even vultures have lines. Fear broke first, then shame. A low boo rolled out from the same folks who wouldn't meet my eyes 10 minutes ago. I couldn't blame them. Eleanor Vance's HOA was known for its vindictive nature. I stood by my truck, my arms crossed over my chest. Sheriff Brody leaned against his cruiser, a spectator at the gutting of my life. He was there to keep the peace, which meant he was there to watch me lose everything peacefully. Brody posted up like a referee with no whistle, watchful, weary, hands off. Eleanor stood near the stage, a queen surveying her court. She radiated smug satisfaction. She had outmaneuvered me. She had the paperwork, the sheriff's compliance, and the auctioneer was about to make her theft official. I could feel the rage simmering just beneath the surface, a low, constant burn. But I kept my face impassive. Recon taught me that the moment you show your enemy what you're feeling is the moment you lose. Let them think they have you. Let them get comfortable. Let them underestimate you. All right, folks, let's get this show on the road. The auctioneer chirped, his voice artificially cheerful. Up for bid today is a true gem of the Rockies. 400 pristine acres, a beautiful ranch house, multiple outbuildings, water rights included. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity brought to you by the Elk Ridge Homeowners Association. No permit placard on the tent. County sales post them by the entrance. Another tell. I zoomed my phone. An empty vinyl sleeve flapped. Placard missing. He was a good salesman. I'll give him that. He was selling my life, my history, my future, and making it sound like a weekend getaway package. My fists clenched at my sides. I could feel the worn fabric of my suit straining at the seams. I forced my hands to relax. Not yet. The timing had to be perfect. We're here today due to a foreclosure action, he continued, glancing at a script Eleanor had clearly given him. But their loss is your gain. We're going to start the bidding at a ridiculously low $500,000. Do I hear $500,000? A hand shot up in the front row. A man in a tailored suit with slicked back hair. He looked like a developer, the kind who would tear down my father's house and put up a dozen identical chalets. I have 500,000, the auctioneer shouted. Do I hear 600,000. Another hand, then another, 600, 700. The numbers climbed with sickening speed. Each bid felt like a punch to the gut. They were carving up my legacy, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. I stood my ground, a silent, solitary statue of defiance. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched. My stillness was starting to make people nervous. A few of the bidders glanced back at me, their enthusiasm waning slightly under my cold, steady gaze. They could feel it. Something was wrong. This wasn't a normal, straightforward sale. The owner was right there, dressed for a funeral, watching them by his home. The tension was a palpable thing, a crackle in the air that the auctioneer's frantic patter couldn't quite cover up. Eleanor noticed it, too. She shot me a venomous glare, then gestured for one of her goons to move closer to make a not-so-subtle attempt at intimidation. She turned to one of the clipboard goons. Go handle it, she hissed. He hesitated. Now, she barked. But when he saw Leo step into his path, that goon froze like he'd stepped into cold water. Eleanor looked around at Brody, at the crowd, at her collapsing grip on the room, and for the first time, her shoulders dropped. She was losing them. The goon took a few steps in my direction, then stopped, seeming to think better of it. $1 million, the auctioneer yelled, pointing to a woman in the back. I have 1 million. Do I hear 1.1? The man in the tailored suit raised his paddle again. 1.1. The price was still a joke, less than half of what the land alone was worth. But it was climbing. The sale was becoming real, legally binding with every shout from the man on the stage. I had to do something. The legal channels had failed me for the moment. The sheriff had failed me. I was running out of peaceful options. My mind raced, sifting through strategies, calculating risks. I needed to disrupt this, to stop the momentum, to introduce an element of chaos that Eleanor hadn't prepared for. Just as the auctioneer was about to call for the next bid, a new sound cut through the air. It wasn't the squeal of the microphone or the chatter of the crowd. It was the deep, throaty rumble of a V8 engine, powerful and unmistakable, coming up my driveway fast. Heads turned. The auctioneer paused, his mouth hanging open. A black Ford Raptor, lifted and imposing, crested the small hill and barreled towards us, a cloud of dust billowing behind it. It didn't slow down until it was right behind my F-250, where it stopped on a dime. The engine cut out, and the sudden silence was deafening. The driver's side door opened, and a man unfolded himself from the cab. It was Leo, and things were about to change. Leo was my best friend. We'd been through basic training together, slogged through the same mud, in the same godforsaken corners of the world. He was a force of nature, a man who was as calm in a firefight as he was drinking a beer on his back porch. He was bigger than me, with a shaved head and a network of faded tattoos running up his arms. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of, and it was a lot. He saw me, and a slow grin spread across his face. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He just gave me a short, sharp nod. It said everything. I'm here. I've got your back. Let's do this. He walked around the front of his truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was wearing jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, but he carried himself like he was in full combat gear. In the rifle rack mounted in his back window, I could see the familiar shape of his AR-15. It was legal. It was secured. But it was also visible. It was a message. You could feel the air shift. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones rose like periscopes. The murmurs dropped a note. Sheriff Brody's hand drifted to his sidearm. Instinct before reason. Then he saw Leo's face. Recognition replaced alarm. That's Leo Ramirez, someone said. The one from that highway shootout back in '09. Suddenly, folks weren't so eager to bid. It told everyone here that I wasn't alone anymore. It told them that the odds had just shifted. Eleanor Vance's eyes narrowed as she took in the sight of him. Her two clipboard goons, who had been looking smug just moments before, suddenly seemed a lot less confident. They took an involuntary step back. Leo had that effect on people. Sheriff Brody straightened up from his car, his hand instinctively going to his hip. He knew Leo, too. Everyone in the county knew him. Knew he was a decorated veteran, a straight shooter in every sense of the word. Leo, Brody said, his voice holding a note of caution. What are you doing here? Came to pay my respects to Ethan's dad, Leo said, his voice a low rumble. Looks like I stumbled into some kind of party. His eyes swept over the auction stage, the bidders, and landed on Eleanor. He didn't smile. He just looked at her, his gaze flat and unreadable. Eleanor, to her credit, didn't flinch. She was arrogant enough to believe her forged papers made her untouchable. This is a private, legally sanctioned event, she said, her voice tight. Your friend is trespassing and causing a disturbance, and you need to leave before I have the sheriff escort you out. Leo chuckled, a low, humorless sound. Ma'am, with all due respect, the only person trespassing here is you. He paused. And as for the sheriff, he said, turning his head slightly to look at Brody, I think he's smart enough to know the difference between a real legal order and a piece of paper somebody printed off their computer. Brody's face flushed. Leo had just said out loud what the sheriff was probably thinking. He had called his bluff. The crowd was murmuring now. The arrival of a second, very large, very serious-looking man had shattered the illusion of a normal auction. The bidders were looking at each other, their paddles held loosely at their sides. The excitement of a bargain was being replaced by the uncomfortable feeling that they were participating in a crime. The auctioneer tried to regain control. Ahem. We have 1.1 million. Do I hear 1.2? 1.2 million, folks, for this incredible property. His voice sounded thin and desperate. No one raised their paddle. All eyes were on the unfolding drama between me, Leo, Eleanor, and the sheriff. Leo walked over to my truck. He brought a large stainless steel thermos with him. He unscrewed the cap, poured steaming black coffee into a cup, and handed it to me. Thought you might need this, he said. Long drive. I took the cup. The warmth seeped into my hands. It was a simple gesture, but it grounded me. It was a moment of normalcy in the middle of the chaos, a reminder that I wasn't fighting this alone. He was my brother, and he was here. Ready when you are, Leo said quietly, leaning against the fender of my truck. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. It meant he was ready for whatever came next. He was positioning himself as my support, a physical barrier and a moral one. His presence gave me the space I needed to make my next move. Eleanor was losing control of the situation, and she knew it. Her perfect plan was unraveling. Her authority was being challenged, not with shouting or violence, but with calm, unshakable resolve. The crowd was no longer with her. The sheriff was wavering. Her goons were useless. I took a slow sip of the coffee. It was black and strong, just how I liked it. I looked at Leo and gave him a slight nod of my own. It was time. Time to stop observing and start acting. Time to walk through the fire. I set the coffee cup on the hood of my truck. I reached into the cab, opened the glove box, and took out a long, leather-bound folder. It was old, the leather cracked and worn smooth by the hands of my father and his father before him. Inside was the original deed to the Caldwell Ranch. Not a copy, not a digital file, but the actual document from 1888, signed by the governor of the state of Colorado. It was written in elegant, looping cursive on thick, yellowed parchment. It was more than a piece of paper. It was a testament. It was proof. It was my right, written in iron gall ink and sealed with the authority of the state. I tucked the folder under my arm and closed the truck door with a solid thud. Leo pushed himself off my truck. "Want me to walk with you?" he asked, his voice low. "No," I said. "This is something I have to do myself. Just watch my back." "Always," he replied. I turned and started walking. I didn't walk around the crowd. I walked straight through it. I headed directly for the auctioneer stage, my path a straight line to Eleanor Vance. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. People who had been eagerly bidding on my home just minutes before now shrank away, avoiding my eyes. They knew on a fundamental level that what was happening was wrong. My presence, my quiet determination, was a mirror reflecting their own complicity, and they didn't like what they saw. The auctioneer saw me coming, and his voice faltered. We have 1.1 million. Looking for 1.2. He trailed off as I got closer. His confidence evaporated, leaving behind a nervous man in a cheap suit who was clearly way out of his depth. Eleanor saw me, too. Her face, which had been a mask of smug control, was now tight with fury. "Stop him," she hissed at her two goons. "Do not let him near this stage." The two men who had been hovering near the back squared their shoulders and moved to intercept me. They were big, but they were soft. They were bullies, not fighters. Leo took 2 long strides and placed himself directly in their path. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his arms crossed, a mountain of silent disapproval. The goons stopped dead in their tracks. They looked at Leo, then at each other, and the decision was made without a word being spoken. They weren't getting past him. They weren't even going to try. I didn't even break my stride. I walked past them as if they weren't there. My focus was entirely on Eleanor. She was the source of this infection, and I was going to cut it out. As I approached the stage, she held her clipboard up like a shield. "You are interfering with a legal proceeding, Ethan. Sheriff, are you going to let him do this? Arrest him." Sheriff Brody took a step forward, his hand still resting on his sidearm, but he didn't draw it. He just watched, his face a mixture of conflict and curiosity. He wanted to see how this played out. He was no longer a peacekeeper. He was an audience member. I reached the small set of portable stairs leading up to the stage and took them one at a time. The auctioneer backed away from the podium as I approached, holding his hands up as if to ward me off. I ignored him. I walked right up to the microphone, the source of the noise that had been desecrating the silence of my home. I didn't say anything into it. I just pushed it aside. Then I turned to face Eleanor Vance, who was standing just a few feet away, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hatred and, for the first time, a flicker of fear. I was on her stage now. I had invaded her space. I had taken control of her show. I held up the leather folder. "You have your paperwork, Eleanor," I said, my voice low and steady, but carrying in the sudden, tense silence. "And I have mine." The moment of reckoning had arrived. It wasn't going to be decided by goons or auctioneers, but by the truth, and I was holding it in my hand. The silence that fell over my front lawn was absolute. Every eye was on me and Eleanor. The bidders, the neighbors, the goons, the sheriff. They were all witnesses now. Eleanor's face was a storm of conflicting emotions. Her arrogance was fighting a losing battle against the raw panic that was starting to bubble to the surface. She had built her entire attack on a foundation of paper, on the assumption that her official-looking documents would be enough to overwhelm any resistance. She never imagined I would have something so simple, so powerful, as the original truth. "That's just an old piece of paper," she spat, her voice a little too loud, a little too shrill. "It means nothing. The law is on my side. I have a current, court-stamped writ of execution. Sheriff, do your job." She was trying to force Brody's hand, to make him choose a side, believing he would have to choose hers. Sheriff Brody walked slowly towards the stage. He looked tired, older than he had just an hour ago. The weight of this decision was heavy on him. He was a man caught between a corrupt system that looked legal and a righteous man who looked like a vigilante. He stopped at the foot of the stairs, his eyes on the leather folder in my hand. "Ethan," he said, his voice heavy. "What is that?" "It's the deed, Brody," I said, my voice calm and clear. I opened the folder and held up the parchment. The original land grant. It shows an unbroken chain of title in the Caldwell family since 1888. It also clearly delineates the property lines, which, as you know, are miles outside the jurisdiction of the Elk Ridge HOA. I then pulled out a second document, a newer one. This is a certified survey map from the county registrar, dated 6 months ago, which my father had commissioned just to be sure. It confirms those boundaries. We are not, and have never been, part of her association. Therefore, we are not subject to her bylaws, her fees, or her fraudulent lien. I laid the documents on the podium for him to see. Eleanor scoffed. That doesn't matter. The court order supersedes that. The judge ruled. What judge, Eleanor? I interrupted, my voice cutting through her bluster. What's the case number? Who was the serving officer for the summons my father supposedly received? Her eyes darted away. She had the answers to none of those questions because they didn't exist. Her paperwork was a house of cards, and I was pulling out the bottom one. Just then, a dusty sedan pulled up behind the sheriff's cruiser. A man in a rumpled but expensive suit got out carrying a briefcase. He'd been at the courthouse 12 minutes away. Motion hearing on a fence dispute. Wrong day for Eleanor. It was Grant, my lawyer. I'd called him from the road, left a frantic message. I never expected him to get here this fast. Sheriff Brody, Grant said, his voice sharp and commanding as he strode forward. I'm Grant Johnson, Mr. Caldwell's legal counsel. I trust you won't be allowing this illegal seizure of private property to continue. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his sharp gaze on Eleanor. Mrs. Vance, I just spent the last hour on the phone with the county clerk's office and a judge I happen to play golf with. It's funny, but they have no record of any lien, judgment, or writ of execution filed against the Caldwell Ranch. Case number 734, see, the one on your documents? It pertains to a traffic dispute from 2018 in another county. Grant tapped a notary seal. Diane Pinter's commission expired last year. She's deceased. Your lien is notarized by a ghost. He held up the state lookup. That's felony forgery stacked on fraud, Mrs. Vance. The blood drained from Eleanor's face. She went from pale to ghostly white in a heartbeat. The crowd gasped. It was one thing to suspect fraud. It was another to have it laid bare by a lawyer in a suit. Sheriff Brody's face hardened. The weary indecision was gone, replaced by a cold, professional anger. He had been played. His authority had been used to perpetrate a crime. He looked at Eleanor with new eyes, seeing not a powerful HOA president, but a common crook. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice dangerously low. You have some explaining to do. Eleanor was cornered. She was trapped. But like any cornered animal, she got vicious. This is a conspiracy, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. He's in on it. The lawyer, the judge, they're all corrupt. This is a legal sale. She was unraveling, her composure shattering into a million pieces. The sheriff was already walking up the stairs now, his hand no longer on his gun, but on his handcuffs. The choice had been made for him. The truth had forced his hand. He had to pick a side, and he was finally picking the right one. But Grant wasn't finished. He held up his phone. One more thing, Sheriff. While I was digging, I looked into the primary bidder, a shell corporation called Mountain View Investments, LLC. Guess who the sole registered agent is? Grant didn't wait for an answer. He looked straight at the man in the tailored suit, the one who had opened the bidding. The man was already trying to slip away, to melt back into the crowd. It's registered to a Mr. Richard Vance, Grant announced, his voice booming across the lawn. Eleanor Vance's husband. A wave of shock rolled through the crowd. It wasn't just a fraudulent foreclosure. It was a conspiracy. A premeditated plot to steal my family's ranch for pennies on the dollar. The plan was never to sell it to the highest bidder. It was to use the auction as a legal smokescreen to transfer the deed to themselves. The man in the suit, Richard Vance, froze. Every eye turned to him, then back to his wife, who looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Brody stepped off the stage and pointed. Richard Vance, stay put. You're detained pending a fraud investigation. He keyed his radio. County, send 2 units to Caldwell Ranch. Hold Richard Vance. Do not let him drive off. Richard froze, keys halfway to his pocket. The whole ugly picture was suddenly crystal clear. Eleanor had forged the liens, forged the court orders, and staged a fake auction. Also, her husband could swoop in and buy my $2.3 million ranch with a lowball bid laundered through a shell company. She had used my father's death as a window of opportunity, thinking I'd be too distracted by grief to fight back. She had counted on my absence, on the sheriff's procedural laziness, and on the greed of her fellow bidders. It was a cold, calculated, and utterly evil plan. The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. It wasn't about rules or bylaws. It was never about the length of the grass or the color of a fence. It was about pure, unadulterated greed. Eleanor's face, which had been a mask of panic, twisted into a snarl of pure desperation. Her intricate scheme had been exposed in front of the entire community she ruled over. Her power, her reputation, it was all evaporating under the hot Colorado sun. Richard, her husband, looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting around for an escape route that didn't exist. The crowd was no longer a group of potential buyers. They were a jury, and they had just heard the prosecution's closing argument. Their murmurs turned into angry muttering. They had been used, turned into unwitting accomplices in the Vance scam. Sheriff Brody was grim-faced, his hand now firmly on the handcuffs at his belt. He was looking at Eleanor with the kind of contempt a lawman reserves for those who mock the very system he's sworn to uphold. "Eleanor Vance," he said, his voice flat and official. "You are under." But Eleanor wasn't going down without one last desperate gambit. She lunged for the auctioneer's gavel, which was sitting on the podium. "Sold," she screamed, snatching it up and slamming it down hard. "Sold to Mountain View Investments for $1.1 million. It's a binding contract. The sale is final." The auctioneer, who looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole, yelped and jumped back. It was a move of pure, frantic madness, a last-ditch effort to create a legal gray area, a contractual dispute she could tie up in courts for years while I bled money and legal fees. She was trying to turn her criminal act into a civil one. She wanted noise, not truth. A messy sale on the record her lawyer could stall for years. "Tie me up. Bleed me dry." It was her last shield. For a split second, nobody moved. The sound of the gavel, the finality of her declaration, hung in the air. It was a brazen, insane move, but for a moment, it seemed to work. It introduced a new layer of complication, a new question of procedure. Could the sale be binding, even if it was based on fraud? Grant was already opening his mouth to object, to argue the finer points of contract law. But I knew we were past the point of legal arguments. Eleanor had crossed a line. She had tried to use the law as a weapon, and now that it had failed her, she was trying to hide behind it. But on my land, under my sky, some things are simpler than that. The law had been too slow, too blind. It was time for a different kind of clarity, a different kind of final word. I looked past her at the mountains my great-grandfather had seen when he first staked his claim. I thought of my father, of his quiet strength, of the Winchester rifle he'd kept cleaned and ready in the house, the rifle he'd taught me to respect and to use. I knew what I had to do. The time for talking was over. I turned and walked calmly off the stage. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I moved with the same deliberate pace I'd used all day. Leo saw the look in my eye and knew immediately. He met me at the bottom of the stairs. "House?" he asked quietly. "House," I confirmed. He fell in to step beside me, a silent guardian. As we walked towards the porch, the crowd watched us go, a confused murmur rippling through them. Eleanor, still on the stage, was shouting frantically at the sheriff, demanding he arrest me, demanding he validate her sale. Brody was trying to talk her down, but she was hysterical. I opened the front door to my father's house. The air inside was cool and still. It smelled of old wood, leather, and home. For a moment, the grief hit me again, a physical blow that almost buckled my knees, but I pushed it down. There would be time for that later. Right now, I had a duty to protect this place, to honor the man who had built it. I walked to the den. Over the stone fireplace, mounted on two thick oak pegs, was my father's Winchester Model 94, a classic .30-30 lever action. It wasn't an assault rifle, not a weapon of war. It was a rancher's gun, a tool used for putting down sick cattle, for scaring off coyotes, for putting food on the table. It was a part of this land as much as the soil and the trees. My hands were steady as I lifted it from the mount. The wood of the stock was smooth and cool, worn by my father's hands. The steel of the barrel was heavy, solid. I worked the lever, the familiar shuck-shuck sound echoing in the quiet room. It was an action I had done 1,000 times. I checked the chamber empty, as it should be. I went to my father's desk, opened the top drawer, and took out a box of cartridges. I calmly loaded a single round into the rifle. Just one. That's all I would need. Leo stood in the doorway, watching me, his face unreadable. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't question me. He trusted my judgment. He knew I wasn't a hothead. He knew this wasn't about rage. It was about drawing a line. I walked back out onto the porch, the Winchester held loosely in one hand, the barrel pointed safely at the ground. The moment I stepped out, a hush fell over the crowd. Every single person, including Eleanor and the sheriff, froze. Their squabbling ceased. The sight of the rifle changed everything. It cut through the legal jargon, the lies, the confusion. It was a simple, undeniable statement of fact. This is my home. This is my land, and you are not welcome. I didn't raise it. I didn't name it at anyone. That wasn't the point. Its mere presence was enough. Eleanor's eyes went wide with a mixture of fear and fury. He has a gun, she shrieked. Sheriff, he has a gun. He's threatening us. Sheriff Brody drew his sidearm, his face grim. Ethan, put the rifle down. Son, don't do this. Don't make this worse. I'm not going to hurt anyone, Brody, I said, my voice carrying easily in the stillness. I'm just ending this. We were 10 miles outside town limits, on private land. County code allows lawful discharge here. Keep it safe, son, Brody muttered. Use the berm. I nodded. Brody's eyes cut to the berm, then to the sky. He jerked his chin at the berm. Safe backstop, he said. And with that, I raised the Winchester not towards the crowd, not towards the sheriff. I angled the muzzle toward the sand berm by the corral, our sight-in backstop. I squeezed the trigger. The crack of the .30-30 was deafening. It was a clean, sharp sound that ripped through the valley, a sound of absolute authority. It echoed off the mountains, a sound that said, enough. Birds scattered from the nearby pines. The flimsy pennant flags on my porch railing fluttered in the muzzle blast. The crowd reacted instinctively. They screamed. They ducked. They ran. The vultures who had been hoping to pick my family's bones clean scattered in every direction, tripping over folding chairs, desperate to get away. Richard Vance, Eleanor's cowardly husband, was one of the first to bolt, scrambling for his car like a frightened rat. In less than 10 seconds, my lawn was a chaotic mess of overturned chairs and fleeing people. The auction was over. The sale was stopped. The single, loud, definitive report of my father's rifle had accomplished what an hour of arguing could not. It had cleared the field. It had ended the debate. In the ringing silence that followed the shot, only a handful of us remained. Me on my porch, the Winchester now lowered, a thin wisp of smoke curling from the barrel. Leo standing at the bottom of the steps, a solid, unmovable presence. Grant, my lawyer, looking stunned but resolute. And on the stage, Sheriff Brody, his gun still drawn but pointed at the ground. And Eleanor Vance, who was frozen in a state of shock, her face a mask of disbelief. She took one step back, tripped on the auction stage lip, and went down hard. Her clipboard flew from her hands like a squashed bug. No one rushed to help her. Even her husband was gone, having peeled out with half the bidders. She tried to stand, but her heel snapped. She sank back onto the grass, panting, mascara streaking. The queen had fallen. County 21. Brody said into his mic, cancel any civil standby for Elk Ridge HOA attempted fraud. Start detectives and forensics. Scene secure. He faced the crowd. This property is closed. Go on home. Mrs. Castillo, 90 years old and mean with a lariat, touched my sleeve. Your daddy fixed my pump in a blizzard, Mijo. He'd be proud. My throat tightened. Benny raised a hand. Sheriff? The rented toilets. They ain't mine. A thin laugh rippled through the yard, shaky but real. The two clipboard goons had vanished with the rest of the crowd. The auctioneer was hiding under his podium. The illusion of Eleanor's power, built on paper and arrogance, had been shattered by a single loud noise. The raw, primal authority of a man defending his home had overwhelmed the flimsy, manufactured authority of her HOA. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air, a sharp, clean scent. It smelled like finality. Sheriff Brody slowly holstered his weapon. He looked at me, not with anger, but with a kind of weary understanding. He knew I hadn't threatened anyone. He knew the shot was a statement, not an attack. It was a full stop at the end of a sentence that had gone on for too long. He had been forced to a crossroads, and in the echoing silence, he finally chose the right path. He turned his back on me completely. His focus was now entirely on Eleanor Vance. He walked up the remaining steps onto the stage, his movements slow and deliberate. Eleanor seemed to shrink as he approached, the fight draining out of her. She was no longer a queen in her court. She was just a criminal whose luck had run out. Eleanor Vance, Brody said, his voice hard as iron. You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The words landed with the force of hammer blows. He reached for her arm, but she recoiled, her eyes wild. "You can't do this," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I have rights. I have lawyers. I'll have your badge for this. I built this community. You think I'm just going to disappear?" Brody didn't even flinch. He grabbed her wrist, spun her around with a surprising amount of force, and clicked the handcuffs into place behind her back. The sound was sharp and metallic in the quiet. It was the sound of justice delayed, but not denied. As Brody led a struggling, screaming Eleanor off the stage, Grant was already on the phone with his office, coordinating the civil lawsuits that would follow, ensuring the Van Cess would be held financially accountable for every bit of this. Leo walked up onto the porch and clapped me on the shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, taking a deep breath. The tension that had been coiled in my gut for hours was finally starting to unwind. I looked out over my property. The ugly white tent, the ridiculous flags, the abandoned chairs. It was all just trash now, temporary garbage that would be cleaned up. The land beneath it was still mine. It was safe. Later, after Eleanor had been taken away and the last of the gawkers had dispersed, Brody came back. He walked up to the porch, stopping at the bottom step. He looked at the Winchester, which I had leaned against the wall by the door. "You know, I can't just ignore that," he said quietly, nodding towards the rifle, discharging a firearm. "I should take you in." "I know," I said. "Then you'd have to explain to a judge why you let a fraudulent auction nearly happen on my property while I was at my father's funeral," Grant interjected smoothly, stepping up beside me. Brody looked at Grant, then back at me. A long moment passed. He finally shook his head and gave a small, tired smile. "Just see that it doesn't happen again, Ethan. Your dad was a good man. He wouldn't want to see you in a jail cell." With that, he turned and walked back to his cruiser, his part in this finally over. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Leo and I, along with Benny Costello, who had reappeared looking immensely relieved, spent the next hour cleaning up the mess. We folded chairs, took down the tent, and pulled up the auction signs. We erased every trace of Eleanor Vance's presence from my land. Benny wrinkled his nose at the blue boxes. We rolled the rented toilets to the road for pickup and scrubbed the grass where they had sunk ruts. When we were done, I stood on my porch, the Winchester back in its rightful place over the fireplace. Leo handed me a cold beer. "To your dad," he said, raising his bottle. "To Dad," I echoed. We drank in silence for a moment, watching the last sliver of sun disappear behind the mountains. The land was quiet again. My land, my home. A man shouldn't have to go to war to protect what is his, but the world isn't always what it should be. I learned that in the army, and I was reminded of it here today. How far will a man go to defend his own? The answer is simple. You go as far as you have to. You stand your ground. You don't back down. Because some things, family, home, the legacy left to you by a good man, are not for sale. Not at any price. And that is a law that no piece of paper, forged or otherwise, can ever overturn.